rejection hit her like a blade through the chest. But it was her stepsister's smile that made her knees buckle. Sarah had known this moment was coming. She had felt it in the way Garrett's eyes slid past her at pack gatherings, the way his hand never reached for hers anymore, the way Vivian always seemed to be standing just a little too close to him. But knowing and experiencing were two different kinds of pain. The great hall of the Blackmore packhouse was filled with witnesses. Every wolf who had ever whispered about the Omega, who dared to dream of an alpha mate, was watching now. Sarah could feel their eyes on her like brands against her skin. Garrett's voice rang out clear and cold. I, Alpha Garrett of the Blackmore pack, reject Sarah Hollow as my fated mate. I choose Vivian Hollow in her place. The bond snapped. Sarah had been burned before. She had been beaten, starved, locked in the basement for days when her stepmother decided she needed to learn her place. But nothing had ever felt like this. It was as if someone had reached into her chest and torn out something essential, leaving only a ragged hole where her heart used to be. She collapsed to her knees on the stone floor. Distantly, she heard laughter. Vivian's laughter. Her stepsister crouched down beside her, golden hair cascading over her shoulder, and leaned close enough that only Sarah could hear her whisper. You lose. Sarah couldn't respond. She couldn't breathe. The agony of the severed bond was drowning her, pulling her under into darkness. Get her up. That was her stepmother's voice, sharp as ever. The Vampire King's envoy arrives within the hour. She needs to be presentable. Hands grabbed her arms and hauled her upright. Sarah's vision swam. She caught fragments of conversation through the roaring in her ears. Peace treaty, offering, gift. They were giving her away. She should have felt fear. She should have felt something beyond this vast, consuming emptiness. But the bond's destruction had hollowed her out completely. What did it matter if she died in vampire territory? What did it matter if she died at all? They cleaned her up, put her in a white dress that felt like a shroud, bound her wrists in silver chains that burned against her skin, marking her as property, as tribute, as nothing. The journey to the border passed in a blur of pain and silence. When the vampire soldiers came to collect her, Sarah didn't struggle. She didn't speak. She simply let them lead her away from the only home she had ever known, a home that had never wanted her. The Vampire King's castle rose from the mountains like a dark dream, all sharp spires and ancient stone. Sarah was brought through corridors lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls, past servants who stopped to stare, until she stood before a throne carved from black marble. And on that throne sat the monster she had been given to. King Severin of Night Vale was pale as death and beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his eyes were the deep red of old blood. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Leave us," he said to the guards. They obeyed instantly. The doors closed with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Sarah waited for the pain to begin. She waited for him to bare his fangs, to tear into her throat, to make her scream the way the stories always said vampires did. She was so tired. At least it would be over soon. But the Vampire King did not move from his throne. He simply looked at her, at the chains on her wrists, at the dried tear tracks on her cheeks, at the way she swayed on her feet like a broken doll. "Who did this to her?" he asked. His voice was calm, soft even, but when Sarah raised her eyes to meet his, she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. His eyes were not calm at all. She waited 3 days for the torture to begin. The chambers they gave her were larger than the entire basement she had slept in for most of her life. The bed was draped in silk the color of midnight, and a fire burned constantly in the hearth, filling the room with warmth she had never been allowed. Servants came and went, bringing food on silver trays, drawing baths scented with lavender and rose, leaving fresh gowns and fabrics softer than anything she had ever touched. Sarah touched none of it. She sat in the corner farthest from the door, her back pressed against the cold stone wall, and she waited. This was a trick. It had to be a trick. The Vampire King was playing with her, letting her believe she was safe before he struck. That was what predators did. That was what everyone did, eventually. The food sat untouched on the table. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she had learned long ago that eating without permission led to punishment. The gowns remained folded on the chair. The bed stayed pristine and empty while she dozed fitfully on the floor. On the second day, the king came. Sarah heard his footsteps in the corridor and pressed herself harder against the wall, making herself as small as possible. The door opened. She stopped breathing. He did not enter. King Severin stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the torchlight of the hall. His eyes found her immediately, huddled in her corner like a wounded animal, and something flickered across his face. Sarah tensed, waiting for the anger, the disgust, the cruelty. "Do you need anything?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that she couldn't answer. She stared at him, mute, trembling. He waited. When she remained silent, he simply nodded once and stepped back. "The door will remain unlocked," he said. "You may go anywhere in the castle you wish. No one will harm you." Then he was gone. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat awake until dawn, crept through the window, waiting for him to return, to reveal the trap, to hurt her the way everyone always did. He never came. On the third evening, a different knock sounded at her door. Softer. When Sarah didn't answer, it opened anyway, and a young woman with kind eyes and dark curly hair stepped inside carrying a tray. "I'm Alara," she said, setting the food on the table. "I've been assigned to attend you." She glanced at the untouched meals from the previous days, then at Sarah, and her expression gentled. "You haven't eaten." Sarah shook her head slightly, the first response she had given anyone. Ilara pulled a chair close to Sarah's corner and sat down, smoothing her skirts. "I've been in this castle for 12 years, she said conversationally. "The king took me in when my village was destroyed by rogues. I was terrified of him at first. Everyone is." She smiled, but he hasn't hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. Not once. Not ever. Sarah wanted to believe her. The wanting was almost worse than the fear. Ilara rose and retrieved a small bread roll from the tray. She broke it in half and ate one piece herself, then held out the other to Sarah. "It isn't poisoned, and you won't be punished for eating. I promise." Sarah's hand shook as she reached for it. She took the smallest bite possible, then waited, her heart pounding. Nothing happened. She ate the rest so fast she nearly choked, and Ilara simply watched with sad, knowing eyes. Later, after Sarah had eaten everything on the tray and Ilara had left her to rest, she found a folded note on her pillow. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. It read, "Tell her the door isn't locked." It never was. She found him in the library at midnight, and for the first time, she saw something familiar in his ancient eyes. Loneliness. Sleep had become impossible. Every time Sarah closed her eyes, she was back in the Blackmoor Great Hall, feeling the bond shatter, hearing Vivian's whisper. So she wandered instead, drifting through the castle corridors like a ghost, expecting at any moment to be stopped, punished, sent back to her room. No one stopped her. The guards she passed simply nodded in acknowledgement and let her go. The library was an accident. She had been drawn by the faint glow of candlelight spilling through a half-open door, and when she pushed it wider, she found herself in a room larger than the entire Blackmore pack house. Shelves stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, filled with more books than she had ever seen. And there, in a chair by the fire, sat the Vampire King. He looked up when she entered. Sarah froze, suddenly aware that she was wearing only her nightgown, that her hair was tangled from restless tossing, that she had no business being here. "I'm sorry," she whispered, already backing away. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't." He set his book aside. "You couldn't sleep." It wasn't a question. Sarah shook her head. "Neither could I." He gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit if you'd like, or go. The choice is yours." The choice is yours. Such simple words. No one had ever said them to her before. Sarah sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the castle, the clock chimed the hour. "You flinch," Severin said quietly. "Every time someone moves too quickly near you. Every time a door opens." Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. Old habit. "I'll make sure it becomes a forgotten one." She looked at him then. Really looked. In the firelight, the sharp angles of his face seemed softer. There were shadows under his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, as though even immortals could grow tired. "You don't eat," he continued. "Alara told me. She said you waited for permission that was never required. In my pack, Omegas eat last, if there's anything left." Sarah's voice came out rusty from disuse. Most nights, there wasn't. Something dark flickered in Severin's eyes. "And the scars on your arms? The ones you think your sleeves hide?" Her breath caught. She hadn't realized he had noticed. She hadn't realized anyone ever noticed. "Pack discipline," she said. "My stepmother believed in thorough lessons." The king was very still. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. But there was something beneath it that made the air feel heavy. "Give me her name." "Why?" "Because I am going to kill her." He said it simply, without dramatics, without posturing. A statement of fact. Sarah should have been horrified. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. "Why do you care?" she asked. "I'm no one. I'm just an Omega they threw away." Severin leaned forward slightly. "You are in my home, under my protection. That makes you someone." His red eyes held hers. "The people who hurt you never looked closely enough to see what I see." "And what do you see?" "Someone who survived." He settled back in his chair. "That requires more strength than any alpha I've ever met." Sarah didn't know what to say. No one had ever called her strong before. They talked until the fire burned low, about nothing and everything. She learned that he had been king for 800 years, and that he preferred the quiet of libraries to the noise of courts. He learned that she loved the smell of rain, and had taught herself to read in secret because Omegas weren't supposed to want such things. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, she was still in the library chair. She woke hours later covered with his cloak, alone, the fire rebuilt and burning warm. It was the first night since her rejection that she hadn't dreamed of blood. The letter arrived at dawn, sealed with the Blackmore crest, and Severin's calm shattered for the first time since she'd known him. Sarah was in the garden when Alara found her, practicing the breathing exercises that one of the castle healers had taught her. The past week had been strange and fragile, filled with small kindnesses she still didn't entirely trust. But she was eating now, sleeping, starting to believe, against all evidence from her past, that perhaps not everyone wanted to hurt her. "The king needs you in the throne room," Alara said, and something in her voice made Sarah's stomach clench. She found Severin standing before his throne rather than sitting on it, a crumpled letter in his hand. His council stood in a tense semicircle nearby. When Sarah entered, every head turned toward her. "What's happened?" she asked. Severin handed her the letter without a word. Her hands trembled as she read. The words blurred together at first, then sharpened into horrible clarity. "Alpha Garrett of the Blackmoor Pack formally requests the return of Sarah Hollow. As my fated mate, she remains my property under pack law. Vivian has failed to conceive an heir. I invoke the moon's right to reclaim what was rejected within one cycle." "He can't." Sarah's voice came out strangled. "He rejected me. He chose her. Pack law apparently allows for reclamation within 30 days. One of the counselors spoke, his tone carefully neutral. "The wolves are threatening war if we don't return you. Then we go to war." Severin's voice was ice. The council erupted. Sarah heard fragments through the roaring in her ears. Not worth the cost, just 1 omega. Political disaster. Send her back and be done with it. Enough. The king's command cut through the noise like a blade. Silence fell instantly. "She is under my protection. She stays." The answer is no. "My lord?" The eldest counselor stepped forward. "With respect, she isn't worth a war." Severin turned to look at the man, and even from across the room, Sarah could feel the ancient, terrible power that uncoiled in that gaze. "She is worth more than every wolf in that territory," the king said softly. "She is worth more than this castle and everything in it. And if you ever suggest otherwise again, I will remove your tongue and feed it to you. Are we clear?" The counselor went pale and bowed his head. Severin dismissed them all with a wave of his hand. When the room was empty, except for the two of them, he finally looked at Sarah, and some of the ice in his expression melted into something almost vulnerable. "I won't let them take you back," he said. "But I need you to understand something. The choice to stay must be yours. If you want to leave, if you want to return to them, I won't stop you. I'll let you go, and I'll mourn you for the rest of my eternal existence. But I won't cage you. Not ever." Sarah crossed the room. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor. She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch, and looked up into his ancient, lonely eyes. "You would go to war for me," she said. "You would burn everything for me. Why?" "Because you deserve someone who would." She reached up and laid her palm against his cheek. He went completely still beneath her touch, barely breathing, waiting. "I'm staying," Sarah said. Severin exhaled like he had been holding his breath for 800 years. She walked into the Blackmoor Pack gathering, wearing silk the color of midnight and a vampire king at her side. The great hall hadn't changed. The same stone walls, the same torch brackets, the same gathered wolves who had watched her humiliation and done nothing. But Sarah had changed. She could feel it in the straightness of her spine, in the steadiness of her breathing, in the way her hand rested in the crook of Severin's arm without trembling. Garrett stood at the head of the hall, Vivian beside him. Her stepsister's golden beauty seemed faded somehow, her smile brittle at the edges. Garrett looked furious. He had expected his summons to be obeyed. He had expected his rejected, broken Omega to be delivered back to him in chains. He had not expected this. "You have no right to keep her," Garrett's voice echoed through the hall. "She is my fated mate. Pack law demands her return." Severin smiled. It was not a kind expression. "She is in my territory, under my protection, by her own choice. Your pack law means nothing here. She doesn't get a choice. She's an Omega. She is a person." Severin's voice dropped, soft and deadly. "Something you clearly never understood." Vivienne stepped forward, her lip curling. "She's nothing. She's always been nothing. A whimpering little, enough." The word came from Sarah's own mouth. She hadn't planned to speak, but something had broken free inside her. Something that had been locked away for 23 years under the weight of pack hierarchy and stepmother's fists, and the constant drumbeat of, "You are worthless. You are nothing. You are less." She stepped forward, releasing Severin's arm, and faced her stepsister. "I used to believe you," Sarah said. Her voice was steady. "Every cruel word, every punishment, every time you told me I was worthless, I believed it. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, small enough, someone might eventually find me worth keeping." Vivienne's smile flickered. "But I wasn't discarded because I was worthless." Sarah looked at Garrett, at the man who had been meant for her and had thrown her away like garbage. "I was discarded because you were all too blind to see what was right in front of you. You're nothing without the vampire's protection." Garrett snarled. "You'll always be nothing." Sarah smiled, and it felt like freedom. "I have a king who gave me choices when you gave me chains," she said. "I have a home where my door is never locked. I have someone who noticed when I flinched, who cared when I couldn't eat, who sat with me through nightmares without asking for anything in return." She turned to Vivienne, met her stepsister's furious gaze. "You said I lose. But look at where we're standing. Look at who's beside me." She laughed, and the sound was bright and unbroken. "I won." Vivienne's face contorted with rage, but Garrett grabbed her arm before she could move. "This isn't over," he growled. "Yes," Severin said, stepping up beside Sarah. "It is. If any wolf crosses into my territory again, for any reason, I will consider it an act of war. And I promise you, Alpha, you don't want to see what happens when I stop being diplomatic." He offered his hand to Sarah. She took it. They walked out of the Blackmoor Great Hall together, and she never looked back. The blood bond didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. They stood in his chambers as dawn painted the mountains gold. Sarah had never been here before. He had given her his rooms when she first arrived. Now she understood why. He had been waiting, hoping, giving her space to choose. "The blood bond," she said. "I want it." Severin went still. "It's permanent. You would feel what I feel, be tied to me for eternity." "I know." She took his face in her hands. "I spent my whole life waiting for someone to choose me. Then you did. You chose to protect me, to wait for me, to see me when no one else looked." She pressed her forehead to his. "Now I'm choosing you." His arms came around her, his ancient heart beating against hers. "I have loved you since the moment they brought you before my throne," he said against her hair. "Broken and brave and beautiful. I looked at you in chains and thought, I will spend eternity making sure she never wears them again. Then make me yours." He lifted her wrist to his lips, red eyes holding hers as his fangs extended. This will sting. I'm not afraid. The bite was quick, a flash that faded into warmth, flooding her veins. Then she felt him. Not just his presence, but his essence, pouring into her like light into darkness. 800 years of loneliness. The moment he first saw her and felt something shift. His patience, his fear, his hope. And beneath it all, love. So much love it nearly drowned her. He lifted his head, crimson on his lips, tears in his ancient eyes. Now you know, he said roughly, everything I am. I know. She kissed him, tasting copper and forever. Later they stood on the balcony, his arms around her, watching the sun rise. Through the bond, she felt his peace, his joy. What do you want for our future? He asked. To stand beside you, not behind, as your equal. My queen. If that's what you're offering. He turned her to face him. I'm offering everything, forever, if you'll let me. Sarah thought about the Omega who had knelt on a stone floor and felt her world shatter. That girl was a stranger now. Forever sounds perfect, she said. And in the golden morning light, with a vampire king who loved her and a bond that sang between their souls, Sarah finally understood what it meant to win.